Welcome once again, Terri Givens, to the Empathy Edge podcast. I'm so glad to have you here to talk about your second book. Well, not your second total book, but your second
Right.
book in the empathy series, Reckoning, Creating Positive Change Through Radical Empathy. I have my copy right here for folks. I hope they will
Yay.
check it out. But welcome back to the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
I love it. We were just talking about how we see each other's work all the time in social, and I kind of feel like you're on my team. I hope you feel like I'm on your team. We're
100%.
we're out there against the headwinds right now, trying to be the
Yes.
voice in the wind. So, give us a little refresher on your story and how you got to the work that you're doing and what you're doing now.
Yes, I am currently a professor of political science at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. But I started this, well, I feel like this work has been going, my entire life.
Hmm.
I grew up in Spokane, Washington, in a place that was less than 1% Black. And the struggles my parents had, and my mother being from Louisiana, my father from Pittsburgh, but both with ties to the South, and how
Hmm.
they were part of the Great Migration. And really just a really, this work starts with my family, right? And
Hmm.
and how I grew up, and how we had dealt with things like internalized discrimination, et cetera. And so really I got into the empathy component of it when I was trying to understand my own bias, right? And that's how I really dug into how do we deal with these issues, because we've had leaders and so on over the years, but I really think it's something that starts with each of us as individuals. We have to deal
Hmm.
with our own bias. We have to develop empathy. Empathy, as you know very well, it's a practice. It's not
Hmm.
something that comes naturally. We have to really, and so for me, it was, how do we create change in a world that's struggling with division and trying to understand how we move forward? And so it really began with myself, and
Hmm.
then understanding how do you then turn around and have empathy for others,
Hmm.
and really set up a situation where we can, create change and build trust.
I love that. And I love that, in your previous book about empathy, radical empathy, you do share a lot of your personal story, which I think brings a lot of texture to it, in addition to your academic and research background in political science, in immigration patterns, in race relations, and all of the work that you've studied and spoken to so many experts about. So you really present a very well-rounded picture, and yet also present that humanized story of this is how lack of empathy has impacted my life and my story. So I appreciate you being vulnerable with us in your books and sharing
Yes.
that. And it also just makes them more interesting, right? To read the
Yes.
stories. So I want to talk quickly about, since that last book and radical empathy, I will link to your episode we recorded on that previously a few years ago. Where do you think we are? Now you've written Reckoning. Where do you think we are in the quest for empathetic leadership and empathy writ large in our society and our interactions with each other? What's sort of changed for you since the first book?
Well, since the first book, it's just, we've seen kind of this blowback, this pushback against empathy and against things like DEI, and so on. And I think that's a response to the fact that actually we were having some success. It's like you have this situation where people are seeing progress, and that's when you get the blowback. And
Hmm.
so that's why I wanted to make sure that we talk about things that actually have happened, that have created better opportunities for people, from the political side, from nonprofits, to all the different ways we as individuals and organizations can continue to make progress in creating change. And when I say change, I mean basically creating an environment where all of us have the opportunity to succeed, right? And
Hmm.
that's why I don't necessarily even focus on DEI so much, but as the fact that when we do this work, it lifts all boats.
Hmm. Absolutely. And you can tackle that inequity and inclusion challenge from a lot of different angles. So what makes empathy so central to the work that you're doing based on the research that you've done? Is that sort of the fuel that's
Yes.
that's injected across all of it?
100%. So I really spent a lot of time trying to understand how do we create change, right? I read different books, I looked at different, situations. And what really struck me is that empathy is really at the core of it because, it's funny. I think people think empathy is being nice to people. And no, empathy is being able to make that connection, even when you're dealing with an enemy, right? If
Yeah,
you have empathy and can say, oh, let me see if I can figure out where this person is coming from.
exactly.
Right. And so as my friend Greg Sittel, I always mention him because he's the one who emphasized this for me. Empathy is not absolution.
No.
Right. And I know actually I use your material all the time in my talks because, people think that, oh, well, I just have to be the nice leader. And, no, we want to be effective leaders, right? We want to be
Hmm.
inclusive and we want to make sure that we're creating a good environment. But that doesn't mean you let people slide when they're doing things wrong.
Exactly. Yeah,
And
accountability is such a part of it because that's also providing the structures and setting expectations is empathetic. People
mhm,
within organizations want to know where they are and how
mhm,
they're doing and where they're going to go. And to your point, I think niceness gets in the way of, well, niceness is I don't want to rock any boats
mhm.
and I don't want to upset anyone. I want to make the perfect decision that everyone's going to be happy with, which is impossible. That's like an impossible quest to go on. And so, really understanding that empathy has a place in connecting with someone as a human being, but also making tough decisions when you need to for the
That's
greater
right.
good, right? Whether the greater good is the organization's health or the greater good is the team's thriving, whatever it is, it's being
Yes,
able to make those decisions in a human way with connection. And
that's right.
to your point, I've always said empathy is about connection, not coercion. It
Hmm.
doesn't mean we submit. It doesn't mean we acquiesce. It doesn't even mean we have to agree. So I want to talk a little bit because I love the different angles in the book that you talk about. Can you kind of break down reckoning and like why you created those sections the way you did? Because I think
Hmm.
it's a really great roadmap into how you're walking us through where empathy weaves in and out all of these things we're talking about.
Absolutely. And it comes from a lot of the work I've done, but also looking at work others have done, right? So it starts with at the individual level. So what can I, as an individual, do as a leader or as somebody who, plays a role just day to day, right?
Hmm.
I have so many people, and part of the motivation for this book was so many people were coming to me after my talks on radical empathy and saying, well, how do I do this work. And I said, you don't have, I mean, starting from the international level, which is where I end the book, you don't have to be out there, working with the UN and so on.
Right.
But some people are doing that. I've done that work myself,
Yeah.
so at the international level, but we start with the individual level and say, what can I do, on a day-to-day basis? And then we work up to organizations. What
Hmm.
are corporations doing? What are nonprofits doing? What are universities doing? I spend a lot, I'm somebody who works in a university. I spend,
Yeah.
a good
Yeah.
chunk of time talking about what I as an individual, but also what organizations have done. So I talk about the fact that it's top down and bottom up. And a lot of the work I've done has been at that intersection of having support from the people at the top, but also working with the kind of the grassroots people building up from the bottom. So as individuals, if we are making those demands
Hmm.
and to these organizations, so even working with my local police department and the city council,
Yes. Yeah. We're
that's the
we're going to
kind.
talk about all that for sure.
Yes. So all of those things, empathy plays a key role in allowing people to see what do I need to do to help this person, or what do I need to do to understand how I can create some change that is going to really, influence people and people's lives where I live
Right.
or beyond.
Yeah, exactly. And I love how you delve into all these areas. You delve into sort of societal race relations, you delve into academia, you delve into organizational culture. So let's talk about a few of the examples that stood out for me reading your book. I'm
Mhm.
going to put my glasses on here. So you mentioned your colleague and friend, sociologist Jean Beeman, or am I
That's right.
pronouncing that correctly? Okay,
Yes.
great.
Uh-huh.
And in an article, she was talking about some work they did in France. She
Hmm.
or he?
She. Mhm.
She, okay, great. She wrote this in an article about her experience with race relations in France. And I want
Hmm.
to read this to folks because I think This is really important, and this is something we in our country need to think about right now, right?
Hmm.
Being French is supposed to supersede any other identification, be it linguistic, religious, or ethnic. Race is not considered a legitimate category by the state. It is not measured in the census, and recently the word race was removed from the French Constitution. And in fact, the United States is often characterized as an example of dangers that can occur when such differences are acknowledged. So, can you talk to me a little bit about some of the stories and the examples, like Jean in the book, where empathy played a role in healing racial conflict, racial tension? And also, I guess the larger question is, why have we manufactured a category to divide us that doesn't even really exist? That's a larger
Well,
question, but
that's a
yeah.
huge question. I'm teaching a whole class about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just to to provide kind of the short version of that,
Hmm.
it goes back hundreds of years, right? I
Hmm.
mean, it's about power, it's about capitalism, it's about, being able to, use people as, means of production instead of seeing them as human beings. And, the problem with, and the reason why this has, been an ongoing issue is our inability to connect to history. And
Hmm.
that's why I've written, my book, The Roots of Racism, gets into the history and why race has persisted as a category, even though it's a social construct.
Hmm.
And, and it's not just race, right? It's also about, I talk about immigration and, in Jean's context, she's looking at people who come from immigrant backgrounds
Hmm.
and how they are dealt with in France. And the reality is, even though they I do think it's right to take race out of the French Constitution. The problem is it doesn't take away racism.
Right.
So
Exactly.
you can take
Exactly.
race out, but
Right.
are you actually dealing with the underlying racism?
Hmm.
And so the key is understanding the role. So it's coming face to face with what we're dealing. It's like
Hmm.
it's not denying, it's not trying to erase history, it's not banning books. It's saying we just need to come face to face with our history and
Hmm.
understand, how did we get here?
Hmm.
And why is it that we still have situations where people are being discriminated against, that they can't get jobs,
Hmm.
even though they are highly qualified? We're hurting ourselves by not,
Yeah.
utilizing people to their potential. And if we are undermining people's ability to get educated, to get jobs, so on and so forth. But the thing is, people are, we are, I'm an example. I'm
Hmm.
somebody who has, moved up in the world, who first generation college goer, and now I'm, a professor, a full
Hmm.
professor at a major institution, and writing books and so on. And so the question is, can we use empathy to understand how we got here and why it's so important that, like I'm, meeting my potential,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
others can, if we just give them the opportunity,
Right.
right? So, and
Right.
that's true in France, it's true in Germany, it's true in the US, it's true in Canada. This is an international thing. And like I said, it's not always about race.
Right.
Sometimes it's immigration status,
Right. It's
it's,
any difference.
yeah,
Yeah. It's any difference where we're othering groups of people and then we're not maximizing the potential of what they can contribute to the whole.
that's
Right.
right.
So this is an interesting dichotomy of racism is you're just punishing yourself when
Exactly.
you're racist, right? You're just punishing
Hmm.
your community and your world and what's potential in your organization even. So
Hmm.
I love that. So now let's focus a little bit because then you also have a whole section on business as well,
Hmm.
and you
Hmm.
talk about DEI and how no, it hasn't just been around since 2020, which I
Hmm.
chuckled at because in the early 90s, my first job out of college was for a big six management consulting firm, and we had what now you would call ERGs. They were
Hmm.
interest groups, and
Hmm.
one of them was the diversity committee.
Hmm.
And we were on that. And I don't even know if we knew what our clear charter was. I think we just knew it was about embracing difference to make, again, to make better business decisions and
Hmm.
to create a bigger whole than the sum of its parts. And that was back again in the mid 90s. They were using that word in a corporate setting. So you talk about, again, not just since 2020. And you mentioned these first movers that are sort of these bright lights that are leading the way in these conversations and continuing to lead the way against all these headwinds. You talk about IBM being one of the first tech companies to focus on equity,
Hmm.
initially gender equity.
That's
And then
right.
you mentioned Intel and L'Oreal Canada, I
Right.
believe. So
Yes.
can you share a little bit about those stories
Mhm.
and what's the actionable takeaway for listeners on what they're doing within their organizations to embrace empathy and difference and see other points of view and then become successful as a result of that?
Right. Well, I'll start with IBM because my sister has a direct link there. But what's really interesting about IBM is they started programs back, oh, going way back into like the 70s and
Mm-hmm.
80s
Mm-hmm.
in, using what my sister was part of was a co-op program. So she was in high school and
Mm-hmm.
she was brought in. And so she went through, a series of trainings and so on. And she, ended up being, very high up in the organization. And so, it's just one example, but they really put in an effort to say, we're going to start reaching out to kids in high school,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And provide
It's like sports
internships and
recruiting.
exactly, exactly. I mean, I wish more people thought of it that way. You have
Yeah.
to kind of, and I do see companies doing this, but I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's only been in more recent years, and
Mm-hmm.
the fact that IBM was doing this so early on ended up creating a very diverse, organization. Now they have issues,
Mm-hmm.
don't,
Right.
but it's just one example of how they went out of their way to make sure that they were getting more women and more people of color into the
Mm-hmm.
workplace. And so Intel caught my eye years ago, um, living in Silicon Valley and hearing about the fact that they went beyond just saying, oh, you need to be hiring more. You can imagine in engineering, Silicon Valley,
Yeah.
hiring women is still an
Oh yeah.
issue.
Yeah.
And so they, had basically require, and this is where I think the top down is important. They actually created a system where managers had for part of their review and whether they
Mm-hmm.
got their bonuses or not required them to show that they were making progress in terms
Mm-hmm.
of hiring women and people of color.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and tying things like bonuses and annual reviews to it was a really important step in
Mm-hmm.
increasing diversity. And then, actually, I did some work personally with L'Oreal Canada, but I did the research into the broader situation because I actually ran into L'Oreal years ago when I was doing research for my book, Legislating Equality, which is one of my academic books.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really interested to see, this was in the like around 2006 or so. They were very actively involved with what was going on in Europe and the European Union and uh, how they were, focusing on diversity. Because, of
Mm-hmm.
course, as a cosmetics company, the vast majority of their clientele customers are people of color.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
so
women.
and women, yes. And
Yeah.
so, but I think they've been doing okay around women, but
Yeah.
the people of color, they needed to do more in terms of just, providing products,
In
but
terms of
also,
understanding their customers and what their needs were and having that
yes,
perspective. It's like it's like I don't know, it's like a mom's baby company being owned by a whole board of men.
yes,
Which is okay.
exactly.
It doesn't mean they can't, but
Right.
having that perspective to really understand what the experience of the customer is like is empathy in action. That's what having an empathetic brand means. It's that you see the world through your customer's eyes, not through your
Exactly.
own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was really interested because, I'd had the experience of working with the folks at
Hmm.
L'Oreal in Montreal. And then to learn more about their history of how they got to the point where they really were changing their advertising. They
Hmm.
were basically, promoting more people within the organization,
Hmm.
and creating opportunities for people of color and women, in the higher up levels of the
Hmm.
organization. and it made them, then it's interesting because they also created, the ERG type entities
Hmm.
and so on. And, it'll be interesting to watch these companies as we're going through a much more difficult environment. Are they maintaining
Yeah.
those commitments?
Yeah.
And as far as I can tell so far,
Yeah.
they are just not being very loud and vocal
Well,
about
I
it.
was going to say, I actually had a conversation, I think it was last year with, I managed to get on a call with the advisors of one of the funds that my financial planner invests us in. And
Hmm.
I thought, wow, lowly me, they're making time to talk to me because I was concerned about decisions around withdrawing investments from companies or the board votes and all that around companies that were committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I said, my concern is purely about performance. Not purely,
Hmm.
but that's what I told them. And I said, I do this work, I'm in this world, and I understand that you make better business decisions when you have a diverse workforce. So, for anyone
Exactly.
listening, wondering why you have these programs to bring more women in, why you have these programs to bring more people of color, it's because when you have this diversity of experience, it actually impacts the bottom line. You actually make
Right.
smarter business decisions. And I said, pulling back from companies committed to that seems like a foolish financial investment.
Yeah,
That you
and
would
we're
pull
see
back
yeah.
from companies that would hire boards or hire leadership or hire employee bases that all think the same way, which means they're going to miss the risks and they're going to also miss the opportunities. And they said to me, yes, you're one of the people that get it, but there's a lot of people who don't. And they said, what's happening is that's a lot of like just doing what they need to do to stay out of the crosshairs. But
Hmm.
internally, they are still committing. They might be calling it
Oh
something
yeah.
else. They might be just, it just might be the ethos of how they hire, et cetera,
Yeah.
et cetera.
Well, you
Because
don't
they're
you
smart.
exactly. You don't have to say, oh,
Yeah.
that's why I tend to avoid the word DEI because
Yeah.
the problem with it is people get a mental
It's
image of,
loaded. Yeah.
yeah, it's a mental image of, oh, we have to do our 1 hour training online, and that's not what it's about.
100%. Or we have to, or in their mind, for whatever reason, they've gotten this in their mind, we hire someone less qualified in order
That's
to
right.
fulfill a quota. And
Right.
that's not what we're talking about.
No,
Yeah.
it's really interesting because I have this conversation, well, at least especially when I've been working in higher ed, that, it's not that you just have to broaden where you're looking for
You
people.
broaden the talent pool.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I talk about, I know you want to talk about it, but when beyond corporations, just looking at what I've been able to do in higher ed
Hmm.
is get people to open their eyes and look beyond and say, oh, there's a broader talent pool out there, and I'm missing all these amazing people because I'm just focused on my little piece of
Right.
who's out there. And so, when we started doing the hiring, everybody's, wow, we're hiring all these amazing people and they're doing such amazing work. It's like, yeah,
They're out
because
there. Yeah.
yes, because all of a sudden you aren't just hanging out, at your conferences with the same people. If you broaden
Yeah.
who you're talking to and just, because people are like, oh, how do I find, these people? I'm like, well,
You got to
if
look
you're
for
not
them.
finding them, it means that you are not looking for them and that you are, it's like people talk about in social media, you're in your silo.
Yeah.
And if you stay in your silo, then no, you're not going to find them.
Right. Right. You're not going to get exposed to those networks. Okay, so let's switch real quick because one of the stories that really stuck with me in terms of practical advice for leaders in any industry was actually the work you did with the Menlo Park, California Police Department. And
Hmm.
you were doing this work as provost at Menlo College.
Hmm.
And you were really working with them on increasing the quality of community relations and
Hmm.
community input. So tell us a little bit about that initiative and what exactly you all put in place to create that better relationship and to be able to be open to those other points of view and have the police department be more empathetic towards the population they were serving and vice versa.
Right. So it was at the time when so this was literally like right in the thick of the issues around policing and James Floyd
George
and
Floyd.
sorry, George
Hmm.
George Floyd. That goes my brain. And the interesting thing was that there was tension between like city council members and the police, as well
Hmm.
as the community. And so in many ways, I was kind of an intermediary who stepped in and said, look, how can we improve communication? So, as part of a committee that was working on this issue of policing and reaching out to the community, and luckily we had a police chief who was very open. He actually was he was involved in PR previously. He understood communication, and
Hmm.
so what we decided to do was create a situation where people in the community could actually talk directly about the issues they were seeing.
Hmm.
And so we held these kind of it was all on Zoom because we were still in COVID, but these town hall meetings in each district, and the council members were welcome to come and, greet their constituents. But, we really tried to make, no police were there,
Yeah.
and I had a set of questions that I would ask people, and it really was, as I talk about, it's really about building trust,
Yeah.
right? And that's how you create change. And so it really created a situation where people felt like they could talk about their concerns and share those, and I would share them anonymously with the city council and the police chief. And what it led to was, I mean, I think the main outcome was building trust, right? That
Yeah.
people felt like, okay, they're listening to me and I have this opportunity to
Right.
connect. And it also led to, the police chief saying, well, we need to have more of our police officers on bikes. Because, people don't like it when we are driving around in these big, huge SUVs
Hmm.
because it's intimidating.
Hmm.
And, we need to do a better job of reaching out, especially to the kids. And
Hmm.
they have issues with, the funny thing is, of course, it's a small city,
Hmm.
and people have a lot of issues with traffic, but there's also, parts of town where people are concerned about, over policing and racial profiling. And so
Hmm.
having venues, and we also created ways for people to send anonymous
Hmm.
concerns and so on. So some of it, actually, of the reforms were already happening at the state level in
Hmm.
California, like keeping track of data, things like, figuring out how much racial profiling is going on. And
Hmm.
so finding ways to, make that more visible on the website, all
Hmm.
kinds of things that we did that I think, you can still see to this day, have had an impact.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what struck me about, and, hopefully folks pick up the book and just, dive into this case study, because so many of the little micro actions you took are things that can be replicated in other organizations to increase trust and increase communication. And the way that those actions really exhibited clarity and communication, which, clarity is one of my 5 pillars of effective and empathetic leadership. Putting mechanisms in place that allow, it's not just tell us how you feel, right? Which what a lot of organizational leaders say, right? I have an open door policy. Just tell me how you feel whenever you want to. Putting the structure in place and putting the safety in place around, let's create a process, let's create a forum for people to give that feedback. Like you said, put in a system where they can give anonymous feedback. Will they
Hmm.
get trolls in there? Maybe. Will they get complainers? Probably. But they're also going to glean a lot of great nuggets of people that are too scared to say something that's on their minds. And eventually, you build trust to the point that you might not need to have anonymous mechanisms, but you can't
Hmm.
start at that point of like, just tell us how you feel. Like, I hear that from a lot of leaders of like, well, everyone on my team knows they can come to me at any time and talk to me about what's on their mind or their experience. Do they? You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like, do they
Well,
really feel safe to do that? And not for anything you may have done, but there could be something within the culture, within the hierarchy, within the power structure that's inhibiting that connection that they can have with you as a leader. And it doesn't mean you're bad or you're wrong. It just means you've got to meet them where they are and put systems and processes and kind of operational decisions in place to foster empathy and trust. And this is where I love when I read these kinds of stories, because it's like, this is brass tacks. This is not
hmm.
fluffy, like,
Right,
I just need to be a better person as a
right.
leader, right? This is no, sometimes you've got to put mechanisms in place and you have to operationalize some of this. So I loved that case study. And you also, I think this was part of that same case study, you provided guidance to create a brave and safe place.
Yes,
Can you talk
exactly.
a little bit about that? I've got this section of the book open because did you actually put this on the website, or were these
Yes, it is on.
guidelines?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
So that's how we set up the discussions, right? We wanted to make sure we were very careful about how we set this up, first of
Of
all.
course. Yeah, it's got to be
Um,
thoughtful.
exactly. And we didn't
Yeah.
want to waste people's time or waste our time. And so we set up these guidelines to
Hmm.
create this brave and safe space. And it was partly because of concerns and this, look, we spent a year talking about this before we launched it.
Hmm.
And so we wanted to make sure we were addressing the concerns of the people in the community, as
Hmm.
well as the city council, as well as the police officer. Because so look, I think a lot of times we forget that police officers are people too.
Right. Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
we want to kind of dehumanize, it's so
Hmm.
funny because we worry about being dehumanized by, the police and
Yeah.
so on, but we have to make sure we understand that they are human beings too.
Right. And they're doing a
And
job. I have one of my older brothers was a police officer for his whole career. He's retired now, and he used to work in some, underserved communities. And they
hmm
would give him awards as like, you actually, you're one of the cops that actually listens to me. And they saw him as a person.
hmm
And so, yeah, it's remembering that as well, because it's when we start to dehumanize each other, no matter what side you sit on, things go off the rails.
absolutely. And so those, creating a brave and safe space was really
Hmm.
important so that we weren't just attacking, what the police were doing, right?
Right. Right.
It had to be an environment where we were trying to uplift rather than,
Yeah.
tear
You
down.
want to move forward. The whole point of it is to move forward, not just to make things worse. But
hmm
I loved some of these guidelines. I just want to read some of these because, again, this is something you can apply to any organization, and guidelines you can have within your organization if you're concerned about psychological safety, if you're concerned about people really being honest with you about what's going on.
hmm
Things like use I statements, recognize
hmm
intentions, ask about them, humanize the other person, like we talked
hmm
about, ask curious questions, dig deeper. My three-word magic phrase, tell me more. I love that that's in
hmm
there. And I love this. It's okay not to be polished or perfect in your delivery. Everyone makes mistakes. We have to be prepared to provide a safe space for learning. And that includes the leader. The leader
hmm
doesn't have to have it all together either.
That's right.
Um, and then know that you don't have to understand to accept another's point of view or experience. That's
hmm
huge. We don't have to agree, but we can hear them out and then respect that that's their experience, even if it's not
hmm
ours. And then finally, out yourself as someone with similar thought struggles. So there's that vulnerability. Like,
hmm
wow, I used to think like that, and someone told me this, or I realized that. Really helping to, again, make that connection of like, I understand where you are because I was there at one point too.
hmm Absolutely.
And then
Yeah.
obviously patience with yourself
Yes.
and others. So what was the reception to that? I'm curious. Like, obviously it went well, but what was the initial reception to guidelines like this and sort of operationalizing this? Were there eye rolls? Were there like, oh, we're making this really bureaucratic, or were people pretty open to it
Well, because we worked with people to, this
to create
council
it?
and yeah. So yes, there, I think early on in the process, there might have been some eye rolls and, to be honest, suspicion, well, what are you really trying to do? And
Yeah,
I think that's why I always say building trust is, so I had to build the trust, with the police and the city council before we could even go forward and try to
right,
build trust with the community.
right.
And so that was really important. But yeah, I think that it was very positive. I
Hmm.
think people felt like they were seen. And that's really, and even for the police and the city council members, they felt
Yeah.
like they had to be seen. And so if I would say the best thing that came out of this for me was understanding how people, even if they're have differences, they want to be respected, they want to be seen, and
Hmm.
they want to be given the opportunity. And I think especially in the social media world, people are worried, well, if I open my mouth, people are just going to laugh at me
Right.
and so having, it was really important that I, as I moderated all of these discussions,
Hmm.
that I was showing respect for people and not denigrating anything they had to say, or
Hmm.
ensuring that when we had these conversations that, it wasn't set up in a way that we were tearing people down. So that's why,
Right.
that was another, some of this comes from the literature on difficult conversations. Some
Hmm.
of it comes from the work, your work, which I
Yeah.
have read
Yeah.
diligently. And so, really, it was a combination of my understanding of how to, move forward these kind of difficult
Hmm.
conversations, but also creating a space where people felt safe. And that was the word that one of the council members kept repeating. We need a safe space.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was like, well, we need a safe space, but we also need a brave space where
Right.
people feel like they are, empowering people. We need to add that to
Yeah.
everything we talk about
Yeah. Absolutely.
as leaders, as members of a community, we want to feel empowered.
Hmm.
And that's something that, we really try to do, is help people
Yeah.
feel empowered, that they have some influence in what happens in their community.
Yeah. And also, I just want to point out like a public service message on this. If this is something, for listeners, their team is going through, it's one thing to just take the playbook and take your guidelines and say, we're just going to implement this within our own organization. You're missing that piece of getting the buy-in from other people. That could be a great starting point of
Hmm.
like, here's some ground rules or here's some expectations we have. What would you add to it? What would you
Hmm.
take away? What do you think is missing? And making it more collaborative instead of going like, oh, this is the solution. Let's just plug this into our organization and boom, tomorrow we're going to have a brave and safe space. You don't
Hmm.
unfortunately get a shortcut on the work, but you can leverage examples like this and tools like this and processes like this to put this in place within your organization to at least have a straw man
Yeah.
and say, this is one way we could go, but how will this work for us and our
Hmm.
culture and our team? Again, what's missing or what do you want to add or what doesn't feel right? Or
Hmm.
what should we definitely keep? And
Right.
then use that instead of trying to find the cookie cutter template that's going to fit within your organization with your people.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah. I think that that is very, very good advice, because we have a tendency, especially in this kind of broader DEI space, to say, we
Mhm.
just tell us what to do
Just
and
tell us
we'll
what to
do.
do. Tell us the words we can't say. Tell us
Yeah.
the like,
And it's
the
like, that's
things.
not how
Yeah,
it
it doesn't
works.
unfortunately doesn't work like that. All right. So as we kind of wrap this up, and I know the big crux of, and correct me if I'm wrong, radical empathy was really how to put empathy into action.
Yes,
And with this book, it feels like it's empathy 2.0 about how to leverage empathy to achieve change. Would
that's
that be
right.
an accurate summary? And
Yes.
so I think your main message is that it's at different levels. It's individual, it's community, it's organization, it's country, and it's global, right? There's sort of
Hmm.
different
That's right.
mechanisms, and we don't have to start with the big ocean to boil.
No.
We can start at the mini ocean within our own hearts, right?
Yes.
So I just want to read this passage in the conclusion that really spoke to me. And then I want to talk to you about just giving us a lasting nugget of where we can go next on this journey. We all have to understand that it is a practice that we have to work on every day, every week, every year, because I don't believe that bias will go away in my lifetime. And it's likely it won't go away anytime in the foreseeable future. We are living in turbulent times, and so many are in pain from the events and crimes that are being perpetuated everywhere we look. We have to be willing to do the work. Even if it feels like it's just a drop in the bucket, imagine that work being done by hundreds, thousands, even millions. It's an important path to change. And what that passage says to me is lean on community.
Exactly. And that's what I have been really emphasizing in the last year or so, is mutual aid is so critical right now. Reaching out to your community. I have a friend who makes beautiful hats, and I ordered a couple from him, and he sent a few extra. He said, would you make sure these get distributed to the homeless in your area? And I said, yes, that is a small thing I can do to make, And so I went and I made sure they went to a homeless shelter, and those four people are going to get hats.
Yeah.
It seems like a drop in the bucket. It's a beautiful thing,
You got to
right?
start. So it's better than doing nothing at all. It's like the starfish story, right? Like it matters
Yes.
to that one starfish. And we can't, as much as we want to, we can't boil the ocean. And I speak very vulnerably and personally that that's where I get overwhelmed of like,
Mhm.
there's so many problems. There's so much injustice. And it makes me want to crawl into my little hole and not do anything. And that's where building community and leaning, going to, being part of a mastermind, being part of an activist group,
Mhm.
being around those leaders who are, I'm going to steal this phrase from an organization I'm part of, Samudra. It's being like hearted, but different
Mhm.
minded instead of like minded.
Mhm.
And really being around those people to bolster you and galvanize you when you're having your bad day.
That's right. That's why I say mutual aid, right?
Yeah.
Because I can go and help somebody who maybe is struggling financially and needs some support, whether it's supporting a food bank. I just started making a monthly donation to my local food bank in the San Francisco area,
Mm-hmm.
because I split my time between
Mm-hmm.
here and San Francisco. But what are, when I think of other ways that people can do this, it's, first of all, be curious, find
Yeah.
out what's going on.
Yeah.
Where do people need help? I have an amazing friend who does this work in San Jose with a
Mm-hmm.
group called, Neighborhood Helping Hands. And
Mm-hmm.
they go to a park and they'll work on cleaning it up,
Mm-hmm.
and they pay the homeless people who come and help, and sometimes they help them find access to services,
Mm-hmm.
there's so much that they can do that. And you, when you do this work, you're getting something too,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's helping you feel empowered and getting past this feeling of being overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's different ways, but sometimes you need I need help sometimes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's why I talk about it's mutual. It's not just
Right.
that I have to give and give. It's that I am getting something as
Yes.
well,
And
right?
I think it holds true not only just for getting involved in social activism, but even your own empathy practice, because
Hmm.
whatever capacity you have on a given day to be an empathetic individual, you're not always going to show up the way you want to show up. And so,
Hmm.
I really encourage leaders or folks listening that get into a community that helps you work on yourself and helps
Hmm.
you be your best self so that you can show up in all these other places. It doesn't mean you have, leadership can be really lonely.
Hmm.
And sometimes if you're in that your own little bubble, you think you're the only one facing these issues, right? A lot of my clients and the folks I'm talking to right now are facing issues of overwhelm with the dramatic transformations that are happening in the workplace. How do I
Yeah.
juggle everything on my plate with my people's needs, with the business demands on me? And they feel like they're the only one dropping the balls.
Hmm.
And it's like, no, you're not. And so reach out to a community who can say, here's what's working for me, or I'm just here to listen, and build that empathy muscle. So then you can go out and be part of these other organizations within your community or in your world. But like you said, it's all got to start with what you're doing. How are you nourishing yourself
That's right.
first, right?
Yeah, and self-care,
All of it.
there's
Yeah.
yeah, just and remember that a lot of times, it's the people closest to you who we I think there's a tendency to forget that even the people closest to you sometimes need that empathy and that support.
Yeah.
And I think we make a lot of assumptions, about family members and friends,
Yeah.
and again, it comes back to make sure you're being curious, ask questions, find out what's
Completely.
going on,
Love it.
and make sure you maintain that
Hmm.
communication, because it's not only, and tell the people you care about how you're feeling, because
Yeah.
that opens them. That's why I say being vulnerable is so important, because when I'm vulnerable with you, you're more likely to be vulnerable with me.
Exactly. You break a wall, and that's, again, with the most effective and empathetic leaders, they're the ones who are like, I don't have all the answers. They're
Hmm.
not running around, like a chicken with their head cut off, but they're just confidently like, hey, I don't know. Let's figure it out together. They don't
Hmm.
have to pretend they're all buttoned up. They have all the answers. They're the guru on high because I've said this before, show me a leader who thinks they know everything, and I'll show you a leader who's irrelevant. Because if they've stopped learning and growing, so your point about curiosity, it's on so many levels. Curiosity is the number one trait of empathy and empathic people, but curiosity about other people's perspectives and points of view and experiences will even help you sometimes get out of your own doldrums,
Exactly.
out of your own head.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes,
Ugh.
indeed.
I could talk to you about this forever, Terry.
We
We
could.
need like a weekly session. Thank you so much for your time and your insights today. And for this book, again, everyone, it's called Reckoning, Creating Positive Change Through Radical Empathy. Your previous empathy book was called Radical Empathy. As
That's
I said,
right.
I'm going to link to your other episode you did for us on that book as well. For anyone, though, that's on the go right now, where's the best place they can learn more about your work?
So you can go to www.terrigivens.com and there's all kinds of links to the work I'm doing. I've got upcoming events that you can be part of. So please reach out and you can join my mailing list as well.
Wonderful.
And yeah, there's and just if you want to Google me too, there's lots of ways to
Yes.
find information.
Terry with an I,
That's right.
Terri. So thank you again. It was so lovely to reconnect.
Yes, it's wonderful seeing you.
And thank you, everyone, for listening to another episode of the Empathy Edge podcast. If you like what you heard, you know what to do. Please rate, review, and share it with a friend or a colleague. And until next time, please remember that cash flow, creativity, and compassion are not mutually exclusive. Take care and be kind.